Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. This happened just a few months ago from the moment I'm writing this. I work in a warehouse on the night shift, so I usually sleep during the day and stay awake between 6 p.m. and 9 or 10 in the morning, even on my days off, because I like to keep the same rhythm in my body. That night I was at work until 4 a.m., and when I left I headed straight home, arriving around 4:15. The streets were completely empty and everything was silent. However, when I arrived at my house, I noticed a car parked right next to my driveway. I slowed down as I passed it to get a better look. It was an old black sedan with heavily tinted windows. You couldn't see anything inside and all the lights were off. I pulled into the garage and parked, throwing one last glance toward the driveway before going inside. In this neighborhood, the houses are pretty spaced out, so it's usually easy to find parking near the house you're visiting. That's why parking directly in front of mine didn't make much sense, especially when there were so many free spots available along the street. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe someone was visiting my neighbors. Maybe they had a gathering or something, and the spots closest to their house were already taken. Before going to bed, I looked out the window once more, about an hour later, and the car was already gone. The rest of the day went by normally. I slept until 6 a.m., then got ready for another night of work. When I left and backed the car out of the driveway, I noticed the car wasn't there anymore, so I didn't give it another thought. I spent the night at work and it was a bit more exhausting than usual, but I was excited because the next night was my night off. The shift felt endless, but I finally got off and headed back home. Again, it was early morning and there were no cars on the road, except for one, the same black vehicle parked in the same spot as the night before. I did the same thing as before. I slowly passed by it, trying to see through the windows, but it looked exactly the same. This time, after parking in the garage, I decided to walk to the end of the driveway to get a little closer. As I headed there, I thought I saw movement inside the car, behind the dark glass. It was just a split second, caught out of the corner of my eye, so I couldn't be sure. It was also possible that it was just a reflection of something in the glass. I stopped about 10 feet from the car. I didn't feel comfortable getting any closer, especially if someone was inside. Still, I didn't see anything else. Before going back, I decided to take a photo of the license plate in case this became a recurring problem. I doubted I'd need it, but I preferred to be prepared. I went back inside. Just like the night before, I checked again a little while later and the car was gone. It was really strange, but it hadn't caused me any harm, so there didn't seem to be much I could do about it. I had dinner, watched some TV for a couple of hours, and then went to sleep until around 6 or 7 p.m. It was already dark when I woke up. Since I had the night off, I went out for my usual long walk around the neighborhood. When I left the house, the car wasn't there, but when I returned from my hour-long walk, it was back again, parked in the exact same spot as the previous 2 nights. I walked around the whole neighborhood and only saw 1 or 2 cars parked on the street, so why was this one always right in front of my house, and only at night? I got closer and this time went straight up to one of the windows. I cupped my hand over my eyes to block the reflection and look inside. The car was empty. No one was inside. There was also nothing that gave me any clues as to why it was there. It was one of those weird situations that makes you uneasy, but at the same time doesn't present any clear threat. I went back into the house and the first thing I did was grab my phone, which I had left charging on the nightstand while I went out for the walk. That's when I saw an unusual notification, a motion detection alert from one of my security cameras. To clarify, I had a camera on the front porch, but it only pointed at the door, so it only activated if someone stood right there. I also had 3 other cameras inside the house, placed in the main rooms. The notification didn't specify which one had caught the motion, so I opened the app to check. There was a 60-second clip saved. I watched it, and for almost the entire video, the house was completely silent with no movement. I was beginning to think the system had triggered by mistake, but in the last 5 seconds, something quickly crossed the bottom part of the frame. It was very brief, just part of a head and some shoulders entering the shot for a split second. I felt my hands go numb as I held the phone. The room the video came from was the same bedroom I was in at that very moment. Suddenly, the silence in the house became deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat as I slowly started to turn around, scanning every corner of the room with my eyes. That person could have been anywhere, even watching me right then. Thoughts swirled in my mind, intensifying my panic. I realized I needed to get out immediately. I ran to the bedroom door and bolted out. At that moment, I heard movement coming from the room, right behind me, and by the time I reached the stairs, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. They were about 15 feet behind me. I got to the front door and ran straight into the woods. In the middle of the terror, I didn't even dare to look back to see who was following me. I had only one thought: get out alive. Eventually, I could only hear my own footsteps crunching over the dry leaves beneath the darkness of the trees. I called 911. When the officers arrived, the car was already gone. Luckily, I had the photo of the license plate I'd taken the day before. It only took them 3 hours to find and arrest the person responsible. It was a man in his 20s, and he looked completely unhinged. Honestly, if I had turned around and seen him chasing me inside my house, I probably would have frozen in fear, or even tripped. Apparently, he didn't have any clear reason for choosing me as a target, but it was obvious that he had. On his phone were several photos of my house, including some taken from the windows at night where I could be seen sitting in the living room. He also had notes with the exact times I left and returned from work every day for the past 2 weeks. The most disturbing part is that we still don't know how he got into my house without being seen by the cameras, and if he managed to do it once undetected, there's no way to know if that was really the first time he entered. Maybe he knew exactly where all the cameras were located, and this was just the one time he made a mistake and got caught briefly on one of them. Either way, for now, I won't have to worry about him for a long time. Story 2. This happened about 4 years ago, but I still find myself thinking about it from time to time. That night, a pretty intense storm was rolling in. I was working as an Uber driver, and on nights like that, everything usually slows down a lot. Sometimes I didn't get a single ride request. Still, I always stayed out waiting. I passed the time either driving aimlessly while listening to music or parked in an empty lot watching YouTube videos on my phone. Even if I got just 1 or 2 rides, it was still extra money I wouldn't have made otherwise. That night went exactly as I expected. The city was empty. Nobody goes out in a storm like that. For the first hour, I stayed in a parking lot, watching the downpour and letting the rain wrap around the silence of the place. After a while, I went to get something to eat, and then returned to the same lot to wait a bit longer. Finally, I got a notification. Someone had requested a ride. I tapped the alert and saw that the person was about 25 minutes away from my location and needed to be driven another 20 minutes from there. When that happens, it usually means there aren't any other drivers available, so I end up being the closest one, even if I'm far. Since I didn't have anything better to do that night, I accepted the ride and started driving to the location. They had pinned the pickup point at a specific spot, and the drive there felt endless. Maybe it was the storm, or the fact that there was absolutely no one else on the road. At times, I even forgot I was picking someone up. It felt more like I was just driving with no destination. It didn't help that the app was taking me into a completely deserted area. I'm not even sure I'd ever been that far in that direction before. There was absolutely nothing around. After about 35 minutes, I finally reached the spot marked on the map. It was at the intersection of 2 roads, but these roads were literally in the middle of nowhere. Empty fields and trees on both sides, and the creepiest part, there was no one there. I confirmed in the app that I had arrived at the location, and I just sat in the car looking around, wondering what the hell someone was doing in such a remote place in the middle of a storm like that. After a minute of staring out the windows, I looked down at my phone to send a message asking where they were. Just then, I noticed someone approaching in the side mirror. He appeared suddenly from behind the car, opened the door, and got in. I had no idea where he came from. I never saw him come up the road or through the trees. The man was completely soaked and looked agitated, almost angry. "Did you order the Uber?" I asked, and instead of replying, he said my name. That confirmed he was the right passenger. I started driving, and after a few minutes, something about him made me feel uneasy. First, he was sitting right in the center of the back seat, which made him fully visible in the rear-view mirror every time I looked. On top of that, he gave off a strange, unsettling energy, like he was hiding something. I really wanted to ask him what had brought him to such an isolated place, and why he was out in the rain in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, I didn't want to provoke him. As we continued, the road became more and more deserted. Finally, I worked up the courage to speak, using the friendliest tone I could manage. "Hey, what brings you out here? I mean, with this storm and all." I glanced at him through the mirror. His eyes quickly avoided mine. It looked like he was about to answer, but then he just went silent. He completely ignored my question, and he did it in a way that struck me as suspicious. That didn't sit well with me. Worse still, he started acting fidgety, constantly looking around and watching me through the mirror. Trying to stay focused on the road with rain pounding the windshield made everything more stressful. I couldn't clearly see what he was doing behind me. Then out of nowhere, he said, "Let me out here." Confused, I started to ask if he was sure, but he cut me off immediately. "Let me out here," he repeated in a demanding tone. Something was clearly wrong, and I didn't want to find out what. I did as he asked, pulling over to the side of the road. He leaned toward the door to get out, but just then I noticed his eyes drifting toward my phone, which was sitting on the center console with the Uber app open. He placed his hand on the door handle and paused. He hesitated for a few seconds, then pulled out his own phone and checked something. At that moment, I knew exactly what was going through his mind. He realized that the app had recorded all his information, full name included, and that whatever he had been planning would be directly tied to him. I knew it by the way his eyes locked onto my screen, like reality had suddenly hit him. Trying to de-escalate the situation, I said, "Don't worry, I'll cancel the ride on my end. You won't be charged." My intention was to distract him and pretend I didn't suspect anything, and that by canceling the trip, maybe he'd think his data would be deleted or something like that. He shot me a cold look, those eyes dead and emotionless, but after a few more seconds of hesitation, he opened the door and got out. He walked into the rain, and within seconds his figure vanished into the fog and water. As soon as he shut the door, I drove off without looking back, before he could change his mind. Even though I technically had no solid proof that the guy had bad intentions, I reported his behavior to the police right away. You never know. A few days went by with no updates, until I received a disturbing phone call. Someone had gone missing that very night. He was last seen near the forest, right by the road where I picked up the man. They asked for more details about what happened, and I told them everything I could. Unfortunately, they never found the missing person, or the guy I picked up. With the storm, any tracks or potential evidence were probably washed away before a proper search could even begin. They never found the missing person, or the man who got in my car that night. I was the last known person to have contact with him. Sometimes I think I was incredibly lucky that I wasn't the one who disappeared that night. Story 3. It all started on what I thought would be a normal weekday, but it ended up being anything but that. It was early April and the rain just wouldn't let up in the area. My job involved both indoor and outdoor work, so rainy days were by far the worst. They left me completely exhausted. That day I finished my shift at 6 p.m. and drove 30 minutes home through the rain, arriving at my house, which was located in a rural part of town. Something strange caught my attention as soon as I pulled into my driveway, which had turned into pure mud from the rain. There were other tire tracks, like another vehicle had recently been there. I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe it was the mail truck or a delivery driver. However, when I reached the front door, I noticed there were no letters or packages. Something didn't add up. From the way the tracks looked, it seemed like the car came all the way to the house, did a 3-point turn, and left. I thought maybe someone just made a wrong turn. I went inside, took off my wet work clothes, and headed straight to the kitchen to make something quick for dinner. It was around 7:30 when I thought I heard a knock, just one, coming from the front door. I say thought because it was very faint, barely audible, and with the rain in the background, it was hard to tell for sure. I got up from the living room and walked across the house to the front door. When I opened it, a gust of wind and rain hit me in the face, but there was no one outside. I stood there for a few seconds before quickly shutting the door to avoid getting soaked. I figured it was probably just my imagination. I went back to the living room where I had been watching a show while checking my phone. Nothing happened for about an hour until I got up to use the bathroom. When I came out, I noticed something that made me frown. A muddy footprint on the floor. It stood out clearly on the white tiles. It was strange because I never walk around the house with my shoes on, especially if they're muddy. What made it even weirder was the location of the mark, right behind the couch, which was facing the wall where the TV was mounted. I hadn't noticed that mark earlier. I went to get a rag and cleaned it up, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I told myself maybe it was just one of those odd little things in life, stuff that doesn't make sense but isn't really important. So I decided to let it go. Still, for a moment, I thought maybe someone else had been there, but I dismissed the idea, thinking I was just spooking myself. I went to the bathroom and then back to the couch. Even though I tried to brush it off, I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. I felt like someone was watching me, like that lingering feeling you get after watching a horror movie. With the way the couch was positioned, the entire first floor was behind me, which made me feel even more exposed. Eventually, the discomfort became too much, and I turned off the TV and went up to my room. At least there I could lie in bed with the wall behind me and without that creepy feeling that something was moving around at my back. I had a smaller TV in my room, so I continued with my usual nighttime routine. About 20 minutes went by, and I was starting to feel more at ease, like maybe everything really had been in my head. Then suddenly I heard a sound outside my room. I can't describe it exactly. It was like a dull thump, maybe a footstep or something brushing against the wall. I couldn't pinpoint it, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. I got out of bed and slowly approached the door. I pressed my ear against it to listen, but there was nothing. I stood there for a while, trying to gather the courage to open it. I told myself I had to make sure everything was okay. I carefully opened the door and looked down the hallway. Everything looked quiet and still, but I knew that if I wanted to sleep peacefully, I had to check the house. The only other room upstairs was a study or office space that I hardly ever used. I started walking toward it, but before I could reach it, the TV downstairs, the one I had turned off, suddenly came on. The same show I had been watching earlier was playing, but now at full volume. A cold panic spread through my chest. I ran down the hallway and down the stairs immediately. The entire first floor was dark, except for the flashes of light coming from the TV. I turned toward the living room, not knowing what I was about to find, but there was no one there. I moved cautiously, scanning every corner as I approached the TV. I turned it off using the rear button. Could it have been a technical glitch, or was it something else? All the strange events from that night started to feel connected. I went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and began checking the house. I should have called the police at that point, but in the moment, I didn't think they'd arrive in time if someone really was inside. They might take 10 or 15 minutes. I searched the entire first floor, checking every corner. I didn't find anything unusual beyond what I'd already seen. Then I quietly made my way back upstairs, now more convinced that it had all just been a series of strange but harmless coincidences. When I reached the hallway, I carefully opened the door to the spare room. I hadn't been in there for a long time, and everything seemed to be in place, until I saw something on the floor in front of the closet. It was the remote control from the living room TV. I felt the blood drain from my face. I backed out quickly and ran from the house while calling the police. When they arrived, they found more signs that someone had been inside, including a broken lock on one of the first floor windows. Most likely that person came earlier while I was still at work. Maybe they walked down the driveway and knocked on the door to see if anyone was home. When no one answered, they left, only to return later and break in. They had been inside the house the whole night, moving around quietly. It's possible they had been watching me from the start. Just thinking about it gives me chills. When I went upstairs to my bedroom, they must have taken the remote and turned the TV on just as I was walking toward the other room. A perfect distraction so they could escape. What unsettles me the most is that they didn't take anything. They left no clear signs of what they were after. Sometimes I think that if anything else ever happens, I just hope I live to tell the story.